Good morning. Thank you. We're here today to talk about sex, drugs, and rock and roll here in this beautiful theater, the Colonial Theater. Later on, you're going to be hearing from sex therapists and pharmaceutical innovators and musicians. But right now, let's take a look at today's theme, sex, drugs, and rock and roll. What do these words mean individually and as a phrase? Where did these words come from? They're very good questions to ask. What do they say about us as a culture and as a counterculture? Words are a component part of language, and regardless of what language you all speak, words mean things, right? People have strong opinions about what words mean, and they have even stronger opinions about what words should mean, and they have yet stronger opinions when they hear other people using language in ways that they think are incorrect. In my role as executive editor, I hear people's opinions about words all the time. On my Facebook feed, at parties, when I do radio call-in shows. And usually people just have specific gripes. They want validation that they're right and that their neighbor who they think talks funny is wrong. Are you judging whether I should have just used who or whom there? It's who. It's okay. And it's great. It's great that you have strong opinions about language. I've been interviewed on hundreds of radio programs, and in that time, I've been asked maybe 2 actual questions. People don't call in to radio programs like this to ask questions. They call in to disguise opinions as questions. My neighbor says the car needs washed. I think he's wrong. Or I think politicians who use the word nuclear should be impeached. Those aren't questions. Those are opinions. They're indictments. Why do people have such strong opinions about words? Does the cupcake chef get this? Do people go into cupcake stores and say, I really like your cupcakes, but my neighbor claims to have gluten intolerance, and that's just a fad, don't we? People want validation. They want to know that they're right. So people want to know whether their opinions, whether it's about the word irregardless or gluten, or about gluten-free diets, they want to be validated. So words mean things, right? Sometimes words have very straightforward definitions. Livermorium is a chemical element, radioactive. Its atomic number is 116. Keratin is a tough, insoluble protein substance that is the chief structural component of hair, nails, horns, hooves, that kind of thing. But many other words aren't so straightforward to define. Take a moment and think, how would you define the word program, or blue, or of? One of my colleagues at the Oxford English Dictionary spent 9 months overhauling the entry for the word run. 9 months. That's a lot. Let's take a look at these words individually and as a phrase, sex, drugs, and rock and roll as a whole. Unless otherwise indicated, the history of the words, where they come from, comes from the American Heritage Dictionary, and the quotations and what years those are from comes from the Oxford English Dictionary. So, sex. Sex comes to us largely unchanged from Middle English, where it was also spelled S-E-X. The Middle English word comes from Latin sexus. And both the Middle English and the Latin forms share one of the common meanings of modern English, and that is the categorization, the biological distinction between what is male and what is female. In that sense, sex appears in the Wycliffe Bible in the late 1300s, in Genesis, in the story of Noah, in this quotation, "Two thou shalt bring into the ark, that male sex and female, even though in later modern English versions, the word sex isn't used there. It's gone away. The same passage in the King James Bible reads, "Two of every sort shall thou bring into the ark. They shall be male and female." Note that the word sex has dropped out. Perhaps it is because by this time, the word sex had extended to other meanings. There's a 1664 citation that refers to sex as the genitals. So it is likely that that term was in use in the common tongue earlier in the century when the King James Bible was written. And then by 1900, sex had come to refer to the physical act of intercourse, and it is this sex that is the sex of sex, drugs, and rock and roll. Drug also existed in Middle English, spelled among other ways D-R-O-G-G-E, and that comes from Old French drogue, and in those senses, it referred to medicinal preparations, like you would find it in an apothecary. It's this sense that Chaucer uses in the early 1400s in the Canterbury Tales. And now Chaucer is a very bawdy writer. A lot of his stories have to do with sex and obscenities and that kind of thing. But his use of drug here was of the standard apothecary kind. It wasn't anything that we would associate it with. The first non-medicinal sense of drug comes as far back as 1668, and the quotation is, "They have many times license from their superior to be drunk or intoxicate themselves with aqua vitae, opium, or any stupefying drugs, to be better able to perform with more spirit and vehemency their mad dance." Sex and drugs, they've literally been with us for centuries. Music is ancient, but rock and roll, that's modern, American even. The verb rock and the verb roll are very old words indeed. Rock in the sense of to move back and forth comes from Middle English rockin', which comes from Old English rockian. The word form is even very similar. Roll, meaning to move by revolving on an axis or repeatedly turning over, comes from Middle English rollin', which comes from Old French roller, which in turn comes from Latin rotula, which is the diminutive for the word wheel. So you can see how you get the axis spinning sense from that. But together, this style of music, born of the middle of the 20th century, this signifier of the relationship between the culture and the counterculture, these two verbs, rock and roll, are intertwined. They are used together as far back as the 1600s to refer to the motion of the ocean when you're on a ship. And then they are used singly, both to describe this motion to music and to motion during sex, that far back. Here we see sex and music intertwined. And then in the 20th century, they play into the history, sex and drugs do, into the history of the nascent forms of jazz and rock and roll, developing, changing, mutating across the centuries and the decades. The music, the dancing, the drugs, the sex, all combined into this one glorious phrase, sex, drugs, and rock and roll. My colleague Ben Zimmer points me to a 1969 Life magazine article, which is believed to be the first time that these three concepts are strung together in print. The mere fact that youth has made a clean break with tradition is unprecedented in history. The counterculture has in its sacraments in sex, drugs, and rock. This black and white assertion of the trinity of counterculture here had obviously been seething for some times as baby boomers smoked and rebelled and danced and protested across the decade. Then in 1977, the punk rocker Ian Dury, he recorded his anthem Sex and Drugs and Rock and Roll, and this is the first time that these three concepts were lexicalized as a formal unit. They became lexicalized as a pop culture trio, as an anti-authoritarian troika, a countercultural triumvirate. From the playwright Eric Bogosian to the tech group Meat Beat Manifesto, since then, artists, musicians, and similar people have evoked this phrase to mine the concept of counterculture. Sex, drugs, and rock and roll. These three concepts are often considered to be pillars of anti-authoritarian viewpoints. This phrase evokes this image of free-loving, pot-smoking, drum-banging hippies, or of stevia-snorting, polyamorous, vintage clarinet-playing hipsters. Hopped-up teens running through the night, smoking dope, banging a gong, getting it on. It's all in there. Here's a counterintuitive idea. There are areas, including the meanings of words, in which the tenets of radical freedom, question authority, crowdsourcing, simply fail to hold. Sex, drugs, and rock and roll as a collective term is often taken as a synecdoche for rebel against the standard. But there are realms, and what words mean is one of these realms, in which rebellion is useless. Even in an area that connotes rebellion, we still need a ruling authority. The irony about language is that it is completely democratic, and yet it relies upon so much on authority. So much so even this term, a term that is all about rebelling against authority, relies on authority for its meaning. Words have meaning, and people turn to a dictionary because dictionaries are seen as an authority. Every language is a set of rules and conventions, and even the most anarchic adhere to some set of linguistic principles. Even while they may agitate towards political breakdown, they still need to express themselves clearly. What about Urban Dictionary, you say? Well, although it tells you how people are using current slang terms, you'll also find a motherlode of people defining their name as something that's awesome and their frenemy as something that's not. Let's take a look at the name Tyler. I stopped checking after the 100th entry, and Tyler had been defined as everything from a poop monster to an egomaniac. Clearly, it's a place to dish on your friends. Now, don't get me wrong, I have nothing against Urban Dictionary. It's great for a lot of things, and it's a very interesting sociological window onto the people who post there. But, fortunately for Tyler, it's also not that authoritative. A sex, drugs, and rock and roll attitude embodies the concept of questioning authority. But most people don't really question authority. Questioning authority doesn't lead to asking questions. Questioning authority usually consists of expressing doubt or concern. Note there are two different uses of the word question here. When you question, you can be asking for information. I have a question about this menu. Or when you question, you can be expressing doubt. I question your commitment to Smarkle Vision. As I stated, people don't like to ask questions as much as they like to state their opinions. As a native speaker of a language, in whatever language it is, you all know what cats and dogs and chairs are. You don't need anyone to explain that to you. And for many words, we, the dictionary editors, we're not the final say. We're not the ultimate authority. We, dictionary editors, rely on experts for a wide array of terminology from expert sources. The International Astronomical Union tells us what a planet is. Sorry, Pluto. Aww, everyone loves Pluto. The American Psychiatric Association tells us through their volume Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders what disorders are. What is considered a planet or what is considered a disorder isn't constant. These concepts, they change over time. Our editorial staff hires expert consultants, such as lawyers who tell us what homicide and murder are legally speaking. Even Wikipedia has controls in place for when intractable issues erupt. So, why does authority exist? I posit authority exists so that people can validate their position. The struggle against authority is the attempt by those not in power to have their positions validated. This is the crux of politics and war and religion throughout the centuries. People email the editorial staff or bombard change.com all the time, complaining that we don't define a word a certain way or demanding that we do. We're both too permissive and not permissive enough. We're told that we're fighting the good fight by labeling words like irregardless and ain't as non-standard. And at the same time, we're betraying linguistic principles by denying these words with a rich linguistic background and storied usage a standard terminology. And still others claim that we're contributing to the inexorable decline of language by putting these words in the first place. Dictionaries, like every other artifact of society, reflect the society itself. The hierarchy of statuses that comprise society, and like every other component of society, it is mutable. People not trusting the opinion of the masses turn to experts for validation, and the beauty of language is that it's egalitarian. You can say whatever you want, but if you want to be understood, you have to follow linguistic rules and conventions that you know innately and that well-edited, curated dictionaries detail. Even something as intrinsically anti-authority as attitudes embodied by a sex, drugs, and rock and roll attitude need to be expressed in a way that can be understood. As speakers of a language, they nonetheless follow linguistic norms, and what's more, everyone follows general convention. After all, ask yourself, when is the last time that you've heard the phrase rock and roll, drugs, and sex? Thank you.